Hi, everyone. We're back for the process experts, automation advocates. We don't know exactly what we're going to call this podcast, but we're working that out. We'd appreciate suggestions from everyone. So first, I'm going to introduce everyone. So Tiese, would you please go ahead and start?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiese. I work as a BPM consultant in the Netherlands, and I've been happily using Camunda to do that in all of my past projects. So,
awesome. Tiese, how long have you been doing it?
For over 15 years now. And the last, wow. I'd say about 7 or so have been with Camunda.
What did you do before that?
Other tools, maybe.
Okay.
Activity was one of them. Big one.
Oh, very
project.
nice.
Yeah.
So that was a very natural transition. Tobias, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Tobias Schäfer. I'm from Stuttgart, southern Germany. And like Tiese, I've been working on several BPM projects in the last years. Before that, also working on other projects without any BPM engines, but I've been basically in the software engineering area now, I think, for about 20 years in total.
Very cool. Uwe, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Uwe Koch. I'm from Hanover, Germany. I'm working at HDI Insurance. So I started about, I think it's more 11 or 12 years ago here at HDI Insurance, and it was the first time I was confronted with a workflow engine. It was not Camunda engine, but the system before. And yes, and I, from that point time on, I always in my topic is process automation. I introduced Camunda and looking at other technologies like robotics, AI, and so to integrate everything together. So actually working in a team who is responsible for car insurance. So yeah, that's it.
Very nice. Maria, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Maria Alish. I'm a product manager at IBA Group, specializing in Camunda, process automation, and digital transformation. I have background in business analyst and a lot of areas of IT. I have experience working in Camunda 7 and Camunda 8, both SaaS and self-managed versions. So I'm passionate about making complex process seamless for users. And so I'm working with Camunda maybe last 2 or 3 years.
Okay. I'm Max Young. I'm old. I've been doing this for about 30 years. Started off with a company called Lombardi, which we sold to IBM, then went to Pega, and then working primarily with Camunda over the last 9 years or so. So guys, I'm going to just ask a couple of questions and we'll kind of go around. The first thing I want to know is, and I'd like everyone to just go in the same order that we introduced ourselves. Can you tell me about what your opinion or your experience was like the first time you saw BPMN? Like, what did you think of it? How did you, were you weary? Was it like a moment when the lights cleared and the angels were singing? What was that like? So Tiese, I'll start with you.
You're putting me on the spot there. I'm trying to think back to that moment. Actually, before that, I'd been working with JBPM.
Okay.
So that had its own notation, which was, I'd say, similar in some ways, but pretty simple because that was what matched with the capabilities of the engine at the time. Yeah. First time I saw a BPMN model, I think it just clicked in my head in the sense that I thought it was intuitive to me. And I guess since I've noticed that a lot of people who are introduced to it have the same experience, that it just makes sense, at least on the basic level. And especially simple diagrams are really easy to just get the idea what's happening very quickly. So that I think that would have been my first impression, I guess. Yeah.
Tiese, do you remember? I go back to JBPM as well. Culturally, at the time, what was happening in technology, if you remember, Struts was a big deal, the UI framework, and Struts had a UI representation that was not unlike BPM. Like this page goes to this page, that goes to this page. And for me, that actually kind of psychologically set me up a little bit. So when I saw BPM, it just seemed like a more involved version. Tobias, what do you think? What was your impression?
Quite some time ago, but what impressed me, or what was the crucial point, was seeing that this process model could be the basis for a common development with a business department. Because until then, often you had specifications and you implemented something, and in the end, you implemented exactly what was in the specification, but it was not what the people really wanted or what they needed. And using the process models was just basically the perfect model to have a common discussion. And till this day, it's still this point, which I think makes BPM very successful.
Maria, what about you? What was your first impression of it?
I started working with BPMN standard maybe in 2007. It was maybe not so good application like currently applications, currently platforms. So, but my first expression was it's really too easy understand and too easy explain business what IT want. Yes, and easy understand for IT what business want. What is the process? Where is the problem in this process, right? So easy to understand for both. Technical and not technical persons. It's really great, and I think the biggest advantages of BPMN standard.
Yeah. Uwe, what about you?
Yes, I started with process modeling on base of people, and I found it quite not so good to understand, to learn. So it's like a tech thing. And so it's the same. When I saw BPMN, it was really, I can really state that this is quite intuitive, because I always saying you start at a whiteboard with boxes and arrows, and so you can start with BPMN as well, and you cope a lot of your cases only with a few symbols. And it's always a thing when now I'm confronted with workflow notation from other systems, from Amazon or whatever. They are always very on the tech level. So I think they will work, but they are not understandable for the business. And so I think it's still the number one in business and IT, both sides. BPMN,
Yeah, I always think of BPMN as sort of like the platonic ideal of the business process. I don't know much about philosophy, but and what little I know, the platonic ideal is like the bare bones of what constitutes something. It's the fundamental, right? So like there's a picture of Picasso drawing a horse with lights in 30 seconds, and it looks like somehow you can tell it's a horse, though it doesn't really look like a horse. And there's there's this idea that if you were to look through all the trappings, the thing that you would recognize would be the platonic ideal. And I always thought of it that way. Like it is what the business is really, really trying to communicate. And it's the thing that we should all agree on. And whether the tech people take it in a more detailed specification oriented way, where we're specifying open API spec for the particular endpoints or whatever the case may be, like it is the common lingua where the business and IT can work together to agree on, hey, what are we building? Who is doing it? What's the next step? That always just seemed right to me, right? It's like music that's on pitch versus, nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah. And that's what happens too, isn't it? I think Tobias said that if you pull up this picture, this depiction of what we're talking about, if you walk to a whiteboard and you start drawing things, is this what you mean?
Yeah.
There's something in front of people, and just that visual aspect is essential, because that makes other people think, do you mean the same thing as I mean? Are we talking about the same thing? And if not, there might be a misunderstanding, but what does this symbol mean? Can you explain it to me? Or what did you intend to model? And that just automatically seems to happen with these models. So yeah, there's something true to what you say, Max, that there's something there that just triggers this automatically with people.
There's my wife studied psychology in college, and she told me that humans are fundamentally visual. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she was like, look at like a list. Like try to, if you look at one of those like find Waldo things, it's actually very difficult because the organization of the information is busy. But if you were to look at like a list of 500 items and one was red, you would immediately pick it out. The human brain is sort of wired to just look for a visual consistency and abnormality, right? And I think that helps a lot when we're trying to model with the business. They'll see a step and they'll say, no, you can't do this first. You have to do that second, because the first step is the more expensive step, and you want to make sure that we're not wasting that money, or whatever the case may be, right? The ability to just reach consensus, I think, is sort of really a critical one. So it kind of leads naturally to a second question. So when is it appropriate to use BPMN modeling? and when is it appropriate not to? So, Maria, I'm going to start with you on this one. What are your thoughts?
So, I can say that BPMN-based tools provide long-term value by making processes transparent, maintainable, and business-friendly. While, for example, some developers prefer sometimes maybe non-BPMN orchestrator for flexibility. So they often lead to black box workflows and making debugging, collaboration, and compliance more harder.
Yeah. So if you're working with a customer and you're trying to solicit, when would you say we should stop talking about BPM now? Let's go into like the visual specification. Let's use UML, or let's use OpenAI, or let's use data modeling to convey the payloads between different systems. What is the trigger for you on that, Maria?
BPMN, when I'm working with some business stakeholders, so BPMN standard help us to understand and analyze and optimize workflows together with stakeholders, not only with IT teams, right? I mean, non-technical persons also. So because BPMN standard compliance, traceability, and so it's easy to understand each other, where we have some bottlenecks in our workflows, what we can improve, etc. Yeah. So I think it's a good way, the good approach to understand and explain each other our minds.
Makes sense. Tobias, what do you think?
Well, as the acronym BPMN suggests, it's obviously suited for business processes, but there are also more cases. So, for example, I have seen it being used in technical processes, because just using a process engine as a kind of state machine actually helps a lot. So, for example, just keeping state, being able to retry something when it unexpectedly fails. So, it's all those aspects of a process engine which also help in more technical projects. Yeah. Of course, there are cases where it doesn't make so much sense. So, for example, if you have a screen flow, just a simple screen flow, and you don't want to commit this to any database, you wouldn't do this with a BPMN process. Although I have seen processes like these as well. Yeah, but from my point of view, it doesn't make so much sense in that case. Yeah.
Tiese, what do you think?
A lot of the same, really. I mean, the standard is there to model business processes, and it does that very well, I think. But try not to use it for things that aren't processes. Don't try to do data modeling, screen flow modeling, all these kinds of things. And also, in some cases, the question comes up, should we model everything that comes before the process? So let's say more on the client side, the typical example, I think, is the client is still browsing our web shop, putting together their order. Is that also something we should coordinate with BPMN? I typically say, well, maybe not, because what are you going to gain from that? And what are you going to measure about the performance of that process? Because it's not really your process. There's nothing happening just yet. The client is maybe doing a lot of things, and it's important, and we want to facilitate that in a good way. But I don't think BPMN is the right tool to do that. And obviously, then if you go into things like data modeling or other kinds of things that you want to model, there are better ways of doing that. So use tools that are good at doing that, and use BPMN for those things where it shines. And the same obviously goes for decisions. I mean, we haven't even talked about DMN yet, but yeah. That is well suited for its own purpose, but don't try to use that to do to model processes, for instance. They are there in their individual areas for a reason, I'd say.
Well, you said something so wise there about, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to improve that? And that's such a key thing, because honestly, if you're not going to measure it, if it doesn't have a potential for improvement, I don't know that it belongs. That's something that you capture in the BPMN. Uwe, what do you think?
Yes, nothing, not much for me to give here additionally. I really think it's for process modeling as well, and I had in mind first glance as well data. Yeah, so what about the data in the processes? We do not have a good thing to model it direct in BPMN, so you can say it's kind of missing, but there are other tools for that on the other side. So also for documentation, it's I think it's good because it's very intuitive. But other tools extended, BPMN vendors extended in their way, because they say, oh, we concentrate on more documentation, on linking, or whatever, and so a documentation tag is not enough. So I think Yes, that's even, I think that's even because the standard is so has two sides. It's obligatory for the standard, and it's extensible for each vendor to concentrate on the special field he wants to be best. And so I really say can only state data modeling of our workflow, yes, of a screen flow, of course. That's nothing for BPMN. So
yeah, I feel like BPMN is it's like if you were an architect and you wanted to build a home for someone, whatever that is, right? And then after that, you get into different level of specification. What's the electricity flow going to be like? What's the plumbing going to be like? Are you going to have a pool? And where's the climate? But I feel like it all starts with the BPMN. You've got to answer those questions. Who does what, when, and then what happens? Once you capture that, then I think you go to, the typical diagrams that I typically use where I'll have sequence diagrams that will sort of define what happens when you get to like a particular activity, so that you know the sequence of internal calls that have to be made. I'll usually do like an ER diagram or a data model, just so there's consensus on what the payloads are that are going back and forth, right? If it's a loan application, doesn't have your credit history, then the process down the way is not going to know whether you should be approved or not. And then typically, so sequence diagrams, I'll do data models, and I'll do like a system diagram, like using C4 notation to kind of indicate what all the systems are that are going to fit in together. And if you get all of that, I think you've got enough that you can go and you can build a system that will sort of meet the needs of the business. And I think it's really important because there's talking to the business, there's making sure there's consensus across the various stakeholders. But there's a second part of this that I think is subtle, which is how do you involve the home team, like the native teams of your customers, in helping to build the solution? Those guys are usually technical, right? They're Java, they're .NET, whatever they are. And they need to know where they fit in. And I think that's where your sequence diagrams, that's where your data models, that's where your system models come in. Because it says, oh, okay, well, we have for example, in the case of Camunda, we have a job worker that needs to do a credit check on a customer. Oh, well, it needs their salary and their national identity number and, I don't know, years on the job. That's the input, and the output is going to be this thing. And then you pass that off to like the more traditional programmers, and they can solve that problem concurrently while you're building the model. So I think that's really important as well.
And there's an additional part that that I've always found has been underappreciated, which is choreographies in BPMN. There wasn't ever really a good tool in the way that we've had for BPMN collaborations themselves. Mm-hmm. And especially in distributed architectures, it seems such a logical thing to model the interactions with this from the perspective of a single process with other processes and simplify it just to the interactions, really. And that's what choreographies really capture, or at least they could be used that way. But for some reason, that's never gained much traction, really, which I think is still a shame, because it would help, again, to figure out, okay, these are the bits and pieces for this process. Now let's look at the context of that process a little bit more, and then maybe zoom in on some of the exact details on how those interactions happen. And that would be where those other things you mentioned, Max, come in.
Yeah. Because
they're better at capturing that.
No, I think you're right. Though the word choreography is a little bit triggering for me, because I think of choreography as...
I can see where that...
Yeah, like smart systems. Like I think of really talented jazz musicians that have been playing together for 20 years and they know how to choreograph, right? Like this guy comes in with a horn over here and then this guy comes in with a bass and so on. And they are just experts and they can make it beautiful, which I think is beautiful, but I think it's the opposite of a repeatable sort of orchestrated sort of a thing where you have like a
something that's predictable.
Yes. Right. One that's reproducible. So we can do like Mozart from 300 years ago or however long. That, it sounds the same. It sounds consistent. You can listen to it in Vienna. It's the same as what you listen to in Canada, right? There's a central authority. And I think that's a little bit more processy, in my opinion. Maria, where do you think decision modeling fits in to BPMN modeling? Like, do you start with decision modeling? Do you lead with it? Do you do it? Is it like a second wave? Like first you start the process and then you do the decisions and so on. Where does DMN come in for
you? Decision modeling notation, I also use in my diagram very often, I can say, because it's a great way to automate some decision. Yes, it's flexible to automate rule basic decision. and it's easy to show to and explain to customer, to business stakeholder, in which way we go to the one flow, second flow, etc. I think it's very understandable for all members, all participants of discussing a process, optimization of process, and it's easy and faster, effective to process orchestration overall.
Yeah. Tobias, what do you think? When do you normally start introducing rule modeling as part of your process when you're doing discovery with the customer?
Well, for me, decision modeling is just another tool in the toolbox. And I wouldn't say I use it from the beginning always. So usually the beginning is the process. And if it's simply the case that a decision model makes sense, then we use it. In some cases, it might be better to just use a simple gateway. But it depends a little bit on the future of the decision. So is this decision going to be changed? What does it depend on? And even sometimes a very simple decision model increases over time. And to have the possibility that the business people can actually change this is actually of great value.
Absolutely. Uwe, what do you think?
Yes, most times as well start with the process, and when I understand that the process is a little bit complicated, a lot of gateways occur, and I say, oh, isn't it one of many reasons of that field that we can put together to make the process simpler? So let's introduce DMN. But I think it's really a good thing, like the process. If you model it with the business, okay, that's what you want. The workflow is that way you want. And if you have rules on the other hand, you can write a lot of text and you can misunderstand it really easy. So that does not mean that a DMN table cannot be complex very fast, but it's really a thing for the developer that he can rely on. Okay, the DMN table is from business side. I can rely on these. You must test it, of course, but it's exactly what you want. So I always would look at that in the second step, I can say, because simply first in the beginning understand each other. That's the process, but as well to make it clear, make a process model simpler, introduce DMN where it is suitable, of course. Yeah.
Tiese, what about you?
I was thinking about training slides I have, which state things like, okay, if you see a process that has too many gateways all connected together, that's maybe a sign that you should consider a DMN model. But as opposed to Uwe's experience, I haven't actually seen that happen in practice ever. In most cases, those gateways would already have been replaced with probably a service task where there's a completely customized implementation of that decision already in place, because we have developers, we know how to do that. Let's do it that way. And the same goes for me, where I think for many organizations, it's just a natural progression to first think of processes, because that's something that a lot of people just naturally understand. Okay, we first do this, then we do that, and maybe conditionally we do these two things. And then at let's say a further maturity level, you realize, okay, there are more kinds of logic we can capture with models, and there is an actual advantage of just extracting that specific piece of logic in a model that we can then talk about and reason about. But processes are just easier apparently to people, and so DMN tends to come later. What I have been pointing out of late really is, if I see one of those processes where there's a service task, maybe followed by a gateway, I say, let's just start by changing the type of that task that comes before the gateway to a business rule task. We won't change the implementation yet. It will still be maybe a Java component that's executing that decision logic, but let's just recognize the fact that there's a decision being taken in this step. We're not just maybe storing something in our internal system or looking something up, but what we're actually doing here is making a decision. Let's make that explicit first, and just as a first step to maybe later replace that with a DMN model in that step.
Yeah, I feel like my neck's going to hurt because I'm nodding so vigorously. I think you're so right about this. I have two things for this. One is I use this thing called the rule of 9. So typically on a process, I try to have like 9 widgets. And then anything more than that, I try to put it into a callable subprocess or a nested subprocess. Because in my opinion, most people can keep track of about 9 things at a time, and then it just starts to look like visual noise. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, going to your point and to Uwe's point, what I typically do is I'll look for gateways. And then I'll say, immediately proceeding this way, should I have a decision here, right? So I look for a fit for purpose. And to me, the criteria is the gateway doing something complicated? Like, is it just, hey, if it was approved or not approved, maybe you don't need a decision ahead of it, right? But if it was approved or not approved, because you're taking into account 17 variables, then maybe you do need a decision, right? So that would be the first thing. And the second thing is, do we need to be able to change these decisions from a business user perspective without having to change the entirety of the process? We don't want to redeploy and retest and do all that other sort of big thing, right? I'll go to the business and I'll talk to them. I'm like, would it be nice if you could change, say, the credit score for an approval for a loan without changing any other part of the system? Because maybe, I don't know, tariffs have been put into place and you want to make sure that the bank is more protected or something along those lines. That seems to me like I think of it almost like gardening. Like the first pass, you do the process modeling. And the second pass, you look at where can I introduce decisions? And then the third pass, you start looking at the things we were previously talking about, like what are the sequence diagrams that are behind the scenes and what's the data model, what's the system and all that kind of stuff. And how does all that fit in? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe there's a parallel there, Max, to what we were talking about before with processes. So yes, you can model, quote unquote, a process without a BPMN model. There are quite a few ways of doing that. But what you would maybe lose is the ability, when that process is running, to actually operate it, to look inside the box, or after the fact, be able to explain what happened. And the same goes for decisions. Yes, I can implement that service task in a Java class. Okay. And what if we have to explain to the customer how we came to that decision on that loan? Do we have that automatically? Well, with a decision model, we would at least get some capabilities to show, okay, this was the decision logic and these were the rules that matched. And that's why we took that decision at that point in time. At the moment, we may make a different decision.
I am going to hurt myself nodding with you. You're so right about this. Especially like when you're looking at customers and they like, why did you reject Mr. Smith's, decision? I mean, you can go to a decision table and just be exactly, this was the input that was passed in, this is the output that happened, and this is why we rejected, or this is why we approved. I feel like it's like, you see those old Roman buildings that have been standing for like 800 years, or in the Netherlands, I think, last time I was there, they told me there was a cafe that had been there for like 1200 years in Amsterdam or something. Like, you look at something that's been built to last. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences between BPM systems. They're fundamentally designed to be anti-fragile, fundamentally designed to be changeable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge advantage. And I think it's not immediately obvious, right? I mean, to your point, T, they'll say, oh, well, just put this in a Java class and we'll put the logic in the Java. Yeah, okay, great. What are you going to do next year when you have to change these rules? Or 2 months from now when you have to change these rules? Are you going to roll out the IT team and have them roll up a whole new project and fund that and QA that and get budget approval and all that other kind of stuff? I couldn't agree more.
And the tester who tested that class and all the pathways through it has left. Ouch.
Fundamentally, that's why we're still running COBOL systems in 2025, right? Because someone took an expedient path. Okay, so just another question for the group here. Are there any events or anything that anyone's going to or that you'd like to promote, you'd like to mention here at the Advocate for People to go check out? Maria, I'll start with you.
Oh, I need to think. So
I saw you just recently you did a big speaking thing that you linked on LinkedIn. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but it's on my
Yeah. We discussed the topic about AI and process orchestration in banking industry, especially. So I can say it's usually thinking strategically. You should think when you choose the right platform for orchestration, for automation, your business processes. Mm-hmm. You should think not only that what we have today, what technology, what application we have today. We think a little bit of user, a little bit in the future. And we think we should understand that our platform should be flexible and adaptable for some new features, some new expectations that we don't know what it was. Yes. So it's usually I say, choose the right platform. It's the biggest challenge for business, for customers, because on the market there are a lot of various platforms, and choose the right platform. It's more complicated task for decision makers.
Yeah. Tobias, do you have any events or any conferences you're going to, things that you think people should be checking out?
Well, we're actually organizing meetups, and there will be a meetup in Stuttgart in end of February
cool.
with the topic of SAP and Camunda, and so I'll definitely be there. So if you want to, please come to Stuttgart.
Well, we'll put a link to that as a part of this podcast. That sounds awesome. Tiese, what about you?
Well, actually, yes, there's something I can shamelessly plug because the Camunda chapter in Antwerp is organizing a meetup on the 1st of April.
Okay.
Which is not a joke, not a joke. And I'll be speaking there about things they don't tell you, which is the title I chose, which will go into some of these topics about things you might come across when implementing a process engine like Camunda, and the things that are maybe not obvious up front. And I'm not only going to be speaking, I'm also hoping for a bit of interaction with the audience, because I may have some views on how you can deal with some of these situations, but others may have completely different experiences. So it's going to be a fun session, I think.
Hey, if you want to liven it up, invite me. I will not run out of questions for you. Uwe, what about you? Do you have anything coming up that you'd like to mention? Cool articles that you've read lately? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, it's again a chapter meeting in about, I think, 2 or 3 hours here in Hanover. We are looking with another insurance company. We're looking at C8. How were the first steps, best practice? We change best practice, and so I think it's always good to get in touch in person. But we stream as well. But I think it's always a thing about how to get the challenges with C8. It's always interesting, and we're looking for CamundaCon, of course.
Yeah. So I'll be at CamundaCon in Amsterdam, and then there are a couple of local CamundaCons in the United States, in Charlotte and Chicago and Texas. And so we're going to be going to that. And then I think in a couple of weeks we're hosting something with Niall for the New York City chapter for the local CamundaCon meetup. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I think in terms of recommending, I think for people things to look at, I would take a look at embedding DeepScan potentially on-prem as an option to potentially have like a non-publicly available, AI model that you can use. And I think it's a really fun exercise to think about how you would model your process in such a way that you're creating the LLMs that you can then feed to something like DeepScan so that you can automate processes in the future. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying you should think about it. I think that would be a fun thing to talk about. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Really appreciate this. This is a lot of fun. I wish we could be together and drinking while we do this, but maybe we can do that in Amsterdam. Who is going to Amsterdam, by the way? Just a show of hands.
I hope I also.
So if that's the case, if everyone's going, we should definitely do like a champions dinner or something. We should get together somewhere and do a nightcap or something, if your schedules permit.
It sounds like fun.
Yeah. All right. Guys, thank you very much. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for making time for this. I know everyone's super busy on Monday. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.